This is Average Joe PT. In our last episode, we talked about the difference between a meniscal tear and just some knee arthritis. So I'm going to leave a tag up there and a link, and hopefully after this episode, you'll go back and look at that, and I go into some detail of that, and then within that, I also go over some specific exercises you can do for either or. On this episode, we're going to talk specifically about the difference between these two phrases and these two words that we hear all the time. Sprain versus strain. You hear that all the time, and they're always interchanged, and it's like, is there a difference? What the heck? What really, if I was to talk to a medical professional, what the heck is really the difference between the two? So on this episode, we're going to specifically talk about that. So let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully you'll give me a thumbs up and a like so that we can go ahead and get this video out to other people to hopefully help them educate themselves, reduce anxiety when someone does hurt themselves, and give them an idea of, do I really need to go see someone or not? So let's talk about the first time, go way back when we hurt ourselves, back when you were kids, or maybe you're a kid right now, maybe you're always a kid. But whether you had sprained your ankle, or maybe you strained a back muscle, or maybe you fell and you hit your hip and they call it a sprain, strain, and they don't really know really what's the difference. So let's go ahead and talk about that, because that's very important, because they're used interchangeably, and the reality is there is a specific difference between a sprain and a strain. So the first thing you think of when I sprain something, hopefully the first thing you think of is an ankle. You sprained your ankle. And that's where the ligaments, okay, now that's specific. Now those ligaments really go from bone to bone. Now that's anywhere in the spine, actually anywhere in the body. And the ligament is really designed to keep the bones aligned with one another, and they're all over the place. But the reality is when you go ahead and we twist our ankle in what we call an inversion strain, which means is you turn your ankle inwards, and next thing you know, the whole outside of your ankle gets all purple and bruised, and you can't step on it, which probably 50% of us in the world have probably done at some point in time. And there's different kinds of sprains, so maybe we'll go in the end, and I want you to watch this to the very end so you can actually see, okay, are there different kinds, and so keep watching to the end. And so when we specifically look at a sprain, like I said, they're connecting bone to bone. Now fortunately, they're designed to hold the joints in place, which is good. And when we overstretch them, let's just say we overstretch in the spine and we kind of causes maybe a sprain in the spine, what happens there is all the tissue above it failed or gave, causing that ligament to take on the tension, and then the ligament couldn't hold it in place, and then that failed, causing a sprain. Now what I'm talking about there is initially those muscles, okay, and those tendons that kind of support everything before we even get to the ligaments, they all failed. What I mean by that is they could not stabilize the joint enough to keep it from moving further than it should. And so then the ligaments had to take on the stress, and then hopefully the ligaments held, but if they didn't, then they begin to fail, which is the grade 1 through 4 that we'll talk about a little bit later. So now when we talk about that piece, that's the muscles, that's when you strain something. So that means is that muscle got all the way to the end of its tissue and then couldn't hold anymore, and then it started to tear. And that's when, unfortunately, you cause what we call a micro tear. And if they get bad enough, you can literally tear the tissue itself and cause bleeding. And that's where that bruising really comes from, is that's blood within that tissue that unfortunately it tore, whether that's a sprain or a strain. And the muscles, it's a strain. And so we're straining the muscles and we're spraining the ligaments. So in the muscles, when they give and they can't give no more, then they fail. Hopefully your muscles are strong enough that that doesn't happen, and you can just go about your day. Maybe you're just sore or something along those lines. You didn't actually cause an injury. But so that strain really is that first chain in the step of protecting your overall joint in your body. Then those ligaments are in there, and then they end up failing. So if a failed sprain, everybody, oh, it's just a sprain. Well, there's, like I said, there's 4 grades. A grade 1 is where you just kind of stretch that tissue, that ligament out. It really didn't, I mean, it did tear, but nothing significant. A grade sprain or 2, really what we're looking at is that joint has gone through its whole end motion and it's gone to the end and it's caused some tear. You have some swelling and some bruising. A grade 3 is where you have a partial tear. Okay, that's literally, they'll call it, oh, you just sprained your ankle. But the reality is on a stage 3 sprain, you got a significant tear within that ligament. Now, stage 4 is what we call a rupture, where, oh yeah, you sprain your ankle. I mean, they'll call it that, but they'll also call it a rupture. And those 2 are interchangeable. A grade 4 sprain is the same thing as a rupture or an avulsion, where the some of the bone and tissues come right off with that ligament, and then it's just kind of floating out there, and it's just a mess at that point. You have lots of swelling, lots of bruising. You're not going to be able to stand on it. It's going to hurt so bad. And so at that point, you anytime you think you have a lot of swelling and bruising from a trauma, let's say, for example, an ankle, then you're definitely going to want, the doctor's going to get a quick x-ray. Same thing when we look in the hip. A lot of times if you end up falling on the hip, they're going to call it probably a strain. Or if you were out running or you tripped and fell or something like that and you fall on it, they might call it a sprain strain, because they really can't distinguish between did the muscles themselves just get strained, or did you also have a sprain to where the ligaments around the ball and socket of the hip, we call the Y ligament, are also called the bigelow, which is, you can go ahead and type that in. It's an interesting ligament. It's really shaped like a letter Y, and it really holds the neck and the head in the place in that socket. And you can sprain those. You can sprain any of those, but that would be something would take a lot of trauma to do, like maybe a car accident. It could do it in a fall if you're a fragile person, but that's what you look at that. Now, when we talk about the spine, the lower part of the back, a lot of times they'll just say, oh, it's a sprain strain or strain sprain. It's like, what the heck is that? That means because of the type of trauma that you had, they can't really distinguish between the two. You have trauma to the muscles and you have traumas to the ligament. But you always want to ask them, okay, I sprained the ligaments in my back. What grade is it? I talked to Average Joe. I looked at his videos and he says there's 4 phases or 4 stages to a sprain. So that's one little tidbit for you guys to look at. So that's really the difference between a sprain and a strain when we're looking at in the body. Now, if you want a little bit more detail, maybe I'll go into a few more of the hard physiology of it. But let's go ahead and just leave it at that. Now, I'd love to give me a thumbs up, and hopefully you'll subscribe to the channel. I'm going to leave a couple links up there. There's some exercises you can do for the hip, knee, and ankle when you go ahead and you have a basic sprain strain. And so until next time, Scully and I always like to say, look up and keep smiling. See you next time, folks.